I'm going to start with something completely unrelated because I just got a really good text message. So for those that are following the drag bill here in Florida, we just got a vote from the 11th Circuit, 2-1, that will stand as unconstitutional. Good job, because it was very unconstitutional, so I just wanted to start with that because I did get a text message that vote literally just came in as we were sitting in this room. The 11th Circuit has found, like I said, 2-1 slim margins, but that drag ban that they're trying to push here in Florida, like other states in Tennessee and Texas, which have found the same, that is unconstitutional. So we'll see where it will go from there, but I just had to start with that because that's good news for Florida here. So good job, 11th Circuit, Florida. But diving into what we're here for, which is basically fighting for your rights, and I'd like to begin with a personal story. I met my wife when I was working at the state attorney's office here locally back in 2013. She had come to the state attorney's office where I was working to close a gap in her resume. She had never done criminal work before, and lo and behold, she found me. Lucky her. So anyway, fast forward, we started dating at the end of 2013, and in 2015, she asked me to marry her. It was very quiet, for lack of a better term. It wasn't something we did here. We went out of town. She proposed to me. I came back engaged, and it's not necessarily something we kept a secret, but it's not necessarily something we were walking around telling everybody. Until 2017, when our wedding invites went out. And of course, we're sending everybody, including co-workers and colleagues, to come on down and celebrate the union between myself and my wife. And a week after we sent out those invites, my wife got fired. And of course, they tried to tell her it was for something that she had done, but like the wonderful attorney that my wife is, she had documented her file, and long story short, we sued the state attorney's office. We did not win, but it was a few months after our case was dismissed that the case of Bostic versus Clayton County, Georgia was decided, and our Supreme Court did find that you cannot discriminate for sexual orientation or gender identity. So while we didn't win, we won. So it goes back to, if you were here for Dr. Clark's opening, it takes one person, right, to make a change. And while we may not have been that person, there were other people in the same boat fighting at the same time for the same respect and equality that others are fighting for across our nation. And so like I said, even though our case was dismissed, and again, we were not looking for some big chunk of change. My wife wanted her history of never been fired in 35 years of working, removed from, the nicks on her resume. And she wanted a public apology. That's all we were seeking. We weren't looking for some big payout. We just wanted, like I said, equal respect and equality within the workplace. And so we did eventually get that. We still don't have it here in Florida, unfortunately. You all probably know what the tenets are, right? It's you can't discriminate against race, color, religion, national origin, sex, disability, age, marital status, AIDS, HIV, or sickle cell. Those are the only ones that are covered in Florida. In Florida, we haven't gotten to sexual orientation and gender identity yet. Actually, I think we've gone a little bit backwards here in Florida, but we're going to work hard, as we've always done, to see that those laws are found unconstitutional, or that they are given language that isn't as broad and vague and can be interpreted in the ways that they are being interpreted. And so that's why it's so important to continue these things like out in the South and the initiatives that we have and expanding the center into other areas than just Bay County. For those that don't know, when, like Mr. Bornhoff said, when the doors were opened in 2018 at the LGBTQ Center of Bay County, it was the only brick and mortar between Tallahassee and Pensacola. And if you fast forward 5 years and a name change, we are still the only brick and mortar between Tallahassee and Pensacola. That is the safe space for the LGBTQ community. And we're working really hard to expand those services into the other 14 counties that exist in the Panhandle so that we can give the knowledge, like what we're discussing today, to those persons so they know what their rights are. And again, a lot of this is really going to depend on whether you're in the federal system, whether you're working in a state system, whether you're working at a public business versus a private business. I won't have everybody raise their hands, but I'm sure we've all heard of the cake case recently. It was the Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission, and it was the hypothetical case that the Supreme Court took, which they're not supposed to. It's supposed to be an actual case in controversy, but this was a woman saying that she had an online order come in, and she didn't want to bake a cake for a same-sex couple. And unfortunately, our Supreme Court has decided that that person has a right to freedom of speech through their expression of their religion to deny same-sex couples business, for lack of a better term. So you have the Supreme Court talking out of both sides of their mouths, which they often do. But again, it's really going to depend on where you're working, what state you're in. There are plenty of states that are sanctuary states here in the United States that you're going to find protections that are better than what the federal system provides for LGBTQ plus persons, disabled persons, or marginalized communities. So really, it's hard to have a conversation when you say know your rights, because it's really going to depend on the atmosphere that you're working in. But firms like mine, my wife and I, we do try to keep people informed. I will tell you, I do not practice employment law. I am probably not the best attorney to be up here discussing employment law, but I do try my best to keep abreast, like I said, of all the cases that are going on. And right now, like I said, in Florida, sexual orientation and gender identity is not covered as something that you are protected in employment. Again, that's only for federal positions. Federal government's working really hard through the 14th Amendment to try to have that applicable to the states across the board, but it just hasn't happened. They go back and forth between saying the state should decide what happens in the state, and the federal saying, oh no, we should govern what you're doing. So again, you just have to make sure that you're reaching out to those resources that know that information. And again, going back to what Dr. Clark said with one person, it's not easy to be that one person that is speaking up and speaking out, but for these cases that exist and come up in these controversies, then these laws would never change. So it is important to make sure that you're reporting those incidences and seeking the remedies that are available to you should you feel as if you were discriminated in your workplace or even on your school campus. I know that FSU does a very good job with making sure that everyone here is met where they are, which is what we've been discussing here this morning. But there are places that are still struggling to accommodate those that are either disabled or trying to open up pride clubs, and they need teacher sponsors and those kinds of things. So again, it's really a matter of knowing where you are, public, private, federal, state, and then knowing what applies to you. And I'm an open book as best I can be. Like I said, employment law, not really my thing, but those cases and controversies that are in the public eye right now, you need to be following and making sure, because if you're planning on staying in Florida, you're still lacking some protections, but if you're going to be under a federal umbrella, you're going to be more protected. So just make sure that you're following those cases, because the law is fluid. It's definitely not static. We do have some laws on the books that should probably not be there still, but again, it takes that one person to be advocating for that change. So make sure that you're advocating for yourself as best you can, or seeking that resource out of the community that can help you advocate for yourself. And again, I just appreciate everyone being here, and I am open to questions, and hopefully nobody will ask me anything I don't know the answer to. I see Ms. Tucker already in the front.
Uh-oh.
I don't know if I need a microphone.
Yeah, you do.
Never
I
in
got-
my life have I ever
Take
said
that.
it. Okay.
Just do it.
I'd like to simply have me.
Hold it.
Is
that
this the
microphone.
origin story of you guys opening your own law firm?
No, that's funny. She asked if this is the origin story of Smallwood Brand Law. It's not. It's the origin story for the wife, because as soon as she left the state, she did, of course, go back into private practice, which is where she came from. I did, after I left the state, I left a few months after her because it became a hostile work environment, rightfully so. So I went to work for the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence for a few years before I joined her in private practice. But she was in private practice before, and neither one of us do employment law, but we do try to stay abreast of what's going on, because it is important, even for people like us who own our own business. We want to make sure that we're implementing policies and procedures as required.
Can you tell us more about what it was like when you stayed? So they fired her, but you were still there, and
Yeah.
clearly they knew she was a part of the community where you were as well.
So, not to get too much into politics, but my family is from the area, so when you talk about being from the area and the good old boy system, I like to consider myself grandfathered into that based on my family. So nobody directly gunned for me. So that's how I survived the firing. But it was a very blatant discriminatory thing that happened, and they tried to use an incident with a case with an upset victim in a case that involved the victim. But like I said, she documented her case well, the notes, the client meetings, and everything that she did. So like I said, but for us being maybe 6 months later, we may have had some outcome that would have been not a dismissal. But like I said, we were proud that just a few months after the Supreme Court decided that you couldn't, at least on a federal level, discriminate on sexual orientation or gender identity, which was our goal. That's all. We were just trying to seek those protections so that there couldn't be a contextualized firing and you're using something when it's really based on something else. So yeah, like I said, I think I was grandfathered in. Nobody really messed with me. I stayed in my lane, put in my notice, and walked out the door. So yeah, so I dodged the bullet. Not fair for the wife, but she's half black, half Puerto Rican. She's queer. She had a lot more X's marked on her back than I did as a white woman. So yeah, she got the brunt of that one at the state attorney's office. But should there be a change in administration, I will go back to prosecution. Favorite job ever. If anybody wants to talk about that.
Or Michelle, any questions in the audience?
Brittany got personal there.
Of course she did.
Hi, hello, how you doing? So what exactly would be the sort of push to put forward the notion of not only more advanced sex education in middle schools and high schools that are more sort of a gay or lesbian demographics, but also via reference of this flag here,
Right.
but also educating in the fact that some people just don't feel that sort of sexual attraction and it's perfectly normal to do. What would be the sort of push for that?
Well, honestly, it's going to take advocacy because in the state of Florida, speaking of something else in the state of Florida that we could just got rid of, we got rid of sex education in our schools. So none of our public schools now it's sex education. So really, it's going to take advocacy. I mean, really, that's what it takes. It's one word, is advocacy. Whether it's one person, a group of people, or thousands of people, it's going to take a collective effort to make those changes, whether that's in employment law, whether that's in diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, whether that's in sex education. It's just going to take advocacy and time. And I know that we feel like we've been doing that, and it's gotten us very baby steps or sometimes 10 steps backwards, but it's a continuing effort that we're going to have to do as a collective across the board, and not just one faction of the community, right? I like to tell people at the center that although we cater to the LGBTQ community, we're a one-stop resource. If we can't help you, we want to make sure that we can get you to somebody who can. You don't have to be LGBTQ. I mean, we want to get you the resource that you can. So it's going to be that same initiative across the board where all of us come together to say that this is important to us, this should be important to you, and that this should be happening in our schools or across the workforce or whatever the case may be. But education, in my opinion, is always key. I think that was my 3 questions.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. You're welcome.